Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Walsh, Senior Media Officer with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Thank you for joining us this morning for a public briefing for the recently released report, Review of the WIC Food Packages, Improving Balance and Choice, the final report. You can download a copy of the report and other supporting materials, including today's PowerPoint slides and an infographic of the timeline of the WIC program at nationalacademies.org/WIC food packages, and a URL will be available on the slide shortly. You can also follow the conversation about the report on Twitter at #WICstudy. For those of you not familiar with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, we are a private nonprofit institutions that provide independent, objective analysis and advice to the U.S. to solve complex problems and inform public policy decisions related to science, technology, and medicine. The National Academies operate under a congressional charter to the National Academy of Sciences that was signed by President Lincoln in 1863. For each requested study, panel members are chosen for their expertise and experience and serve pro bono to carry out the study statement of task. The reports that result from the study represent the consensus view of the committee and must undergo external peer review before they are released, as did this report. For today's briefing, we'll start off with some opening remarks and a summary of the report, and with the remaining time, several members of the committee that wrote the report will answer some questions you have. Please note that this briefing is scheduled to last for 1 hour unless we run out of questions beforehand. Lastly, I want to go over a few technical aspects of the webinar with you. We will take questions through the Q&A box located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type your question in the box at any time and click Submit. We ask that you leave the box set to your questions to all panelists. And if you have any technical issues during the event, please contact WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. Once again, that number is 1-866-229-3239. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Victor J. Zhao, President of the National Academy of Medicine.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and good morning. On behalf of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine and the Committee to Review WIC Food Packages, I'd like to welcome you to this public briefing and release a report. As you heard, the report is called Review of WIC Food Packages, Improving Balance and Choice, the final report. I'm Victor Zhao, the President of the National Academy of Medicine, formerly known as the IOM, or Institute of Medicine, and it's my great privilege to provide you with a background of this report and maybe a few words about implications of this report. As you all know, WIC, which is a special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, was established by Congress in 1972 as a nutritional assistance program for low-income, pregnant, breastfeeding, and postpartum women, for infants and children up to age 5 who found to be at nutritional risk. Now, the WIC program is designed to provide specific nutrients determined by nutritional research to be lacking in the diets of the target population. The foods offered through WIC must align with the current dietary guidelines for Americans, and the dietary guidelines are revised every 5 years. In addition, Congress mandates that evaluation of WIC food packages occur every 10 years. So the WIC food packages remain relatively unchanged until the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service asked the Institute of Medicine, IOM, to convene an expert committee to review and then update the food packages in 2004. The committee report was completed by 2006, and the report called WIC Food Packages, quote, a time for change, made recommendations for sweeping revisions to the food packages. Following the issuance of the final rule in 2009, the majority of IOM's report recommendations were implemented by the USDA. These updates included providing whole wheat bread, several additional grain options, a cash value voucher to purchase vegetables and fruits, reduction in the amount of juice, eggs, milk, and formula, and removal of whole milk for all participants except 1-year-old children. In 2014, the USDA asked the National Academies to once again review the WIC food packages, and today's release is for the last of 3 reports that have examined the food packages. In the committee's first report, it was recommended that white potatoes be allowed for purchase with a cash value voucher. Committee's second report presented the evidence, analysis, and framework to be applied to develop the recommendation to be presented today. The final report includes the committee's recommendation for changes to food packages, implementation of proposed changes, and research and data collection. So let us joining us to describe the report's finding and recommendation and answer questions are key members of the committee. First, the chair of the committee and several members. Dr. Kathleen Rasmussen, the committee chair, is a professor in Division of Nutritional Science at Cornell University. The other members whom I'm going to ask Dr. Rasmussen to introduce are Dr. Marianne Bittler, Dr. Patsy Brown, Dr. David Davies, and Dr. Rafael Perez-Casmilla. The work of the committee was supported by staff that included Director Marie Latulippe, the Program Officer Megan Quirk, Research Associate Bernice Chu, Program Assistant Amar Saeed, and Food Nutrition Board Director Ann Yetkin. The staff and committees have dedicated to this project close to 3 years, and really their hard work is really far-reaching and is greatly appreciated. In 2015, the WIC program served approximately 8 million women, children, and infants. This number includes a little bit more than half of infants and 30% of children ages 1 to 5 in the U.S. We hope that these proposed revisions to the food package improve both the attractiveness of the program to its millions of participants, as well as its success in meeting program goals. So I'm really now very pleased to turn the briefing over to Dr. Kathleen Rasmussen. She'll present an overview of the report findings, recommendations, and then she'll open the briefings to questions. Thank you, Kathleen, for being here, and may I turn this over to you?
Yes, certainly, Dr. Zhao. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to speak with you today about the work of the committee to review the WIC food packages. I will begin by explaining the task and how we approached it, and then go on to the revised packages, and I will close with our recommendations for implementation and research. But first, a little bit of background. Dr. Zhao has just given you the facts here, so I'll move forward to the next piece. For those of you not personally familiar with the WIC program, it's important that you know that the program is organized around 7 packages, and these packages are organized by the person who is receiving the benefits: young infants, older infants, those with special dietary needs, children ages 1 to 4, pregnant or partially breastfeeding women, postpartum women who are not breastfeeding, and fully breastfeeding women. We will refer to these packages by the name of the participant, not the package numbers in this presentation. Now let's move to the task. This committee was given a task that is very complex, so I'm going to distill it to the essence. And that is, we were asked to recommend revisions for the WIC food packages that are culturally suitable, cost-neutral, efficient for nationwide distribution, and not burdensome to administer. In essence, this meant we were asked to review the scientific literature to assess current WIC food packages for consistency with the dietary guidelines for Americans, to review the nutritional requirements of the WIC population and conduct analyses about their intakes of nutrients and foods, to conduct food expenditure analyses, to conduct sensitivity analyses, and last but hardly least, to prepare a regulatory impact analysis. So far, the committee has produced 3 products. Today's release concerns the one on the right, but we began with the white potato report, as it is commonly known, that, as Dr. Zhao indicated, recommended that white potatoes could be included for purchase with the cash value voucher. We then produced an interim report about a year ago that contained all of our background information and a first set of analysis. Since that time, we have received additional data and redid all of the analyses, formulated our plans for revising the food packages, then tested the robustness of these with sensitivity analyses, and went on to the regulatory impact analysis. So now I'd like to begin by describing the criteria for these food package revisions, because as you can imagine, there might be many ways to solve this problem, and the committee needed some guidance for this. We had a set of criteria that were used for the committee in 2006. We tweaked these slightly for this report, but I want to focus now on just the one that is different here. The committee decided it could not do its work without one more criterion, and that criterion is the following. The packages should provide a balanced supplement to the diets of women and children. The origin of this criterion is in the name of the program, because this is the special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children. And we thought it should be clear that the packages we were recommending were supplements. To that end, we said that the supplements should provide a moderate proportion of an individual's requirement for a particular nutrient or recommended amount of a food group, that the supplementation target might differ depending upon the nutrient or food group, and the degree to which foods available in the marketplace would be able to supply these nutrients. And finally, we thought that accommodation for cultural suitability and food preferences would be acceptable. To reiterate, the remaining criteria are the following, and I am paraphrasing the criteria here. First, that the packages should contribute to the reduction of the prevalence of inadequate and excessive nutrient intakes, and an overall dietary pattern that's consistent with relevant dietary guidance, and that the foods in the packages do three things: that they're available in forms and amounts suitable for low-income persons, that they're readily available, commonly consumed, widely available, readily acceptable, commonly consumed, widely available, account for cultural eating patterns and food preferences, and provide incentives for families to participate in the WIC program. And finally, those foods should not create an undue burden on state agencies or vendors. These criteria are entirely concordant with the task that we were given. So in addition to this new criterion, the committee also had unique information available to it. And this is the first time a committee to do this has had information about how WIC participants actually redeem the foods in the packages. We had data from some of the states that have implemented the electronic benefit transfer. These data aren't perfect, but they're a good start. The food items in the WIC package are ordered from top to bottom, from most to least redeemed. And to make this clearer to you, I show you that the most redeemed item is infant formula. People come to WIC for the formula, so this number isn't any surprise. The next most redeemed items are eggs, the cash value voucher, and whole milk for 1 to 2-year-olds. At the bottom are whole grain bread, infant fruits, vegetables and fruits, peanut butter and legumes, and infant cereals. And following far behind are infant food meats. So there is quite a range from 31 to 94% of redemption for the foods in the WIC food package. And the committee used this information in several different ways that I'll explain during my presentation. The next thing we had to do is decide how to make the decisions. We had a lot of information, some of it conflicted with one another. So to do that, the committee developed a transparent, reproducible decision tree into which we put the information that we received from our data analysis. This decision tree doesn't make a good slide, so you have this illustration. So on the input side are the data from NHANES that provide information about the adequacy of nutrient intakes and food group intakes that are below recommended amounts for all of the population subgroups that are served by WIC. And these would be women and children with who indicate WIC participation within NHANES, the amount of nutrient and food groups that are in the package compared to recommendations, how much of a gap there was that had to be filled for nutrients or food groups. We considered also the acceptability and availability of foods and the public comments that we received. After putting this information through the decision tree, we wound up with priorities for action in terms of which nutrients or food groups were more important than others. We identified potential changes in amounts of food that could be offered, potential options for substitutions and new foods or food forms that could be used, the potential utility of an increase in the CVV, and we also identified places where no action was needed, that the status quo was good enough. Now, using this decision tree produced some major findings that guided the committee's work. First, that the amounts of several foods could be reduced to meet the criterion of supplemental because they were present in amounts above and far above anything one reasonably would consider supplemental. That the cash value voucher or CVV could be increased to address the low intakes of several priority nutrients. That additional forms of food could be considered to promote intake, and that canned fish could be included in more packages to address low intakes of seafoods. Now, before we could finish our process, we had to think about how we were going to, we had to test our work. And there was a framework for revisions that was used in 2006 that we edited slightly and presented in the interim report, and we didn't change it here. What you see is only the bottom third of that. And what enters this framework is the change in quantity of foods in the package, by which we have added or removed foods to get to the new food packages. This process was required by USDA to be cost neutral. That is to say, the final packages, collection of packages that we had created had to be within 10 cents of the current cost of those packages. So once we had our ideas, we had to test the cost. Also, once we had our ideas, we had to make sure that we had delivered the food groups and nutrients that we thought we had. This is an iterative process. We went back and forth many times until we got to a stable estimate. Then we needed to test the robustness of this against various kinds of threats to its utility, and for that we did a whole chapter's worth of sensitivity analyses that are described in the report. So from there we have revised food packages, and I'm going to begin with an overview. We think that the amounts of food reflect the concepts of balance among the food groups and supplemental in terms of amount. The food groups that are going to be increased, or the benefits of the package, are the cash value voucher, the whole grains, and the seafood. We are recommending the following food groups be decreased: juice, milk, legumes for most participants, peanut butter, infant vegetables and fruit, and infant food meats. We are providing food specifications for breakfast cereals, yogurt, soy beverage, and the new grain options. And options are increased for grains and dairy, the forms of vegetables and fruits, ranges of container sizes, and allowed substitution. So there is definitely more choice and flexibility in the proposed packages. But the package structure itself, those 7 packages that I showed you earlier, are largely unchanged. Now I'd like to walk us through the revised changes and the rationale for each of these changes. The first one I mentioned was increase in the cash value voucher. This is going up by $4 to $24 to reach amounts of $12 to $35. The lowest amounts occur in packages with the most people, and the highest amounts in the packages with the fewest people, because it's the only way we could afford to do it in a cost-neutral environment. Given the high redemption of the cash value voucher, we felt that it offered the most flexibility for aligning the packages with both cultural eating patterns and food preferences. It definitely has the potential to provide a wide range of nutrients, including priority nutrients such as potassium and fiber, that were difficult to obtain elsewhere in the package. and it offers the potential to increase vegetable intake, which were low for half to all of WIC participants, but we recognize this will only happen once participants' preferences for fruit are met. Another new feature of this is that the fish will be included in all the packages if USDA recommends this as we implements this as we recommend, and that's going to be in amounts from 10 to 60 ounces every 3 months. Seafood intakes were below recommended amounts in 82 to 100% of WIC participants, and fish is only currently included in one food package that is for exclusively breastfeeding women, and this is a very small group of women in terms of the participation as a whole. Inclusion of fish in the package provides balance across food groups and with consistency with the dietary guidelines, and for many participants it introduces seafood into their diets for the first time. However, fish is expensive, and to contain costs it's included as part of a rotation with legumes and peanut butter. Now, WIC already has a rotation of legumes and peanut butter. But even with that rotation, legumes and peanut butter are present in quite excessive amounts in some of the packages, in amounts up to 167 or 177% of the recommended amount in the dietary guidelines. And it's no wonder participants tell us there's too much peanut butter. So one way to address that is to make the rotation less frequent, from once every 2 months to once every 3 months. If we do that, it helps to bring down the top end, but it isn't a complete solution, and a complete solution here was not possible because of the available package sizes in which legumes and peanut butter are available in the marketplace. We considered the possibility of a 4-month rotation for legumes and peanut butter, but that didn't deliver what we needed for fish. So our compromise is a 3-month rotation, legumes, peanut butter, fish, legumes, peanut butter, fish. It will reduce excessive amounts of legumes and peanut butter and increase, on average, the amount of fish. For some groups, we're at moderate, but for some population groups, we are not. I want to note that all 3 of these foods are shelf-stable, so offering them in a rotation seems like a reasonable thing to do. Next, whole grains are increased from 16 to 24 ounces, and they're actually offered in a range of package sizes. This is because whole grains are below recommended amounts in terms of consumption for 100% of WIC participants. This range of sizes permits the acquisition of available sizes of bread, no more hunting the store aisles for that elusive 16-ounce loaf of bread. Also, cornmeal, corn masa flour, teff, and buckwheat can be acquired with this benefit. This will make breakfast a new event for WIC participants who much prefer teff or buckwheat to American breakfast cereal. Next, we recommend reduction of juice from 0 to 64 ounces. This is because whole food is the universally recommended or preferred form both by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the dietary guidelines. For children, juice is offered in the revised package at 53% of the amount recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics. For women, in the revised package, all will receive 64 ounces of juice, except for postpartum women who will receive none because their caloric requirements are lower than women who are breastfeeding. Participants here may choose to substitute a cash value voucher of $3 for the 64 ounces of juice. This is a cost-neutral substitution. It permits participants who prefer juice for its taste or its convenience to continue to receive juice, but those who would prefer to have whole fruit instead may have a $3 cash value voucher with which to acquire it. We are also recommending that dairy be reduced to 12 to 16 quarts per month. And as you can see from the small table that's projected, children are receiving 85% of the recommended amount currently, and women from 71 to 119% of the recommended amount. Again, it's no wonder that women complain there's too much dairy. We were restrained by the currently available package sizes in how we could change this. So we were able to get down to 71 to 75% of the recommended amounts. This is more than what the committee considers moderate. But in so doing, these are even number of quarts, so there are no more dangling quarts that are being recommended. That means no more searching the grocery store aisle for that elusive quart of milk either. And this will simplify things for vendors as well, as does, of course, that lack of the 16-ounce bread. Now I'd like to turn to breastfeeding in WIC. It's part of WIC's goal to improve nutritional status, infants' nutritional status, and WIC works hard at this. It provides education, anticipatory guidance about, and support for breastfeeding. It encourages women to breastfeed for as long as possible, with stronger support for exclusive than for partial breastfeeding. However, this support is not uniformly available, and that's an important issue here. But the committee noted that partial breastfeeding may be more achievable than exclusive breastfeeding for many WIC women. In our literature review, the barriers to breastfeeding for low-income women were considerable, given the circumstances under which they live, where breastfeeding may not be normative, and in which they work, in which maternity leave may be limited, and women may return to work rapidly after work, and work in environments where pumping milk might not be possible. Therefore, the committee developed a vision for breastfeeding in WIC that guided the changes that we made. First, that we feel breastfeeding of any intensity should be supported, that all women, and we italicize all women here because it's not true at the moment, all women who are interested at all in breastfeeding should receive adequate counseling and support for breastfeeding prenatally and through the first month postpartum. That first month postpartum is really important. It takes that long for mothers and babies to get in sync with one another and for women to have solved any problems they might have. Infant formula is not issued routinely in the first 30 days. For women who request it, however, its issuance is individually tailored to the needs of the dyad. Now, to make it clear why we did this, I want to talk just a moment about what happened when the recommendations of the 2006 committee were implemented in the final rule in 2009. To support exclusive breastfeeding, the 2006 committee recommended that women either exclusively breastfeed, or if they didn't want to, they could get up to 104 fluid ounces of formula. This created a forced choice for women who were not confident about breastfeeding or who needed some formula to be able to breastfeed at all. And what women did in response to this was certainly leave the partial breastfeeding package and move to the fully formula feeding package, which was definitely an unanticipated and undesired outcome. So the committee is recommending to USDA that in the first 30 days that still no formula be available to exclusively breastfeeding dyads. They are receiving a full food package for the mother. It's more generous than it was the last time, and it's not necessary for women who are exclusively breastfeeding. But for women who are interested in breastfeeding but want to breastfeed in the presence of some formula, and I show you in italics and bold here, after a careful assessment of the needs of the dyad, that dyad be allowed to be issued up to 364 fluid ounces of formula in the first month. That's about half the amount a baby might need in the first month. We feel that this leaves open the possibility for women to continue to breastfeed at least through that first month. And then if it's going well, they can continue either as partial breastfeeders or move to exclusive if that works for them. Or if it's not working for them, they can still change to full formula feeding. We also considered the food packages for the mother and the infant together because in WIC, the package that the mother gets is entirely determined by how her infant is fed. And this results in 3 groups of individuals: the formula feeding dyad, the partially breastfeeding dyad, and the fully breastfeeding dyad, shown from right to left. And I want to focus on what's going on for the women, which is shown in the bottom, and some changes that we're recommending. which is first that the formula feeding dyad receive a cash value voucher of $15. This goes to the woman, $25 for the partially breastfeeding woman because her caloric needs are higher than that of the postpartum woman not breastfeeding, and $35 for the fully breastfeeding woman because her dietary needs are the highest of all. And a similar range is proposed for fish, 10 ounces every 3 months for formula feeding dyads, 30 ounces for partial breastfeeding, and 60 ounces for fully breastfeeding. Even with these changes, there remains a difference in both actual cost to WIC and perceived value in these 3 food packages. The committee has reduced those differences, but they haven't gone away entirely. The fully formula feeding dyad receives the package of the highest cost. Partial breastfeeding is in the middle, and exclusive is still the lowest. I want to end our findings by talking about the regulatory impact analysis. This was a new feature in this report. The 2006 committee didn't do one. It has 2 parts. A narrative part in which the committee found that the revisions that it proposes are expected to benefit USDA's Food and Nutrition Service, state and local WIC agencies, vendors, industry, and program participants. And compared to the current food packages in its quantitative analysis, the committee found that the revised food packages are expected to save about $220 million program-wide in the first 5 years of implementation, which we expect to begin in fiscal 2018. Now, these packages are cost neutral across the packages, but a regulatory impact analysis looks at what happens to them over a period of time as technical rules for implementation occur and as participants make different choices. And there are 2 changes that we expect to happen over this time. First, with more of a cash value voucher, the cash value voucher doesn't increase in value every year. It only increases in value when inflation has got it to be a whole $1 more than it was previously. So it increases periodically, and when it's not increasing every year, that actually saves USDA money. We also expect with this additional support for breastfeeding and additional options that we will see more women choose partial breastfeeding and instead of formula feeding. And as I indicated, the partial breastfeeding package is less expensive than the full formula package. And if women do this as frequently as we expect they do, and we are using a very conservative estimate for this, we expect that also will contribute to saving money. The committee had a couple of recommendations for implementation, and these are first that the Food and Nutrition Service should develop tools and strategies needed to assist state agencies, local agencies, and vendors to inform participants about and support them to make the best use of the expanded options for the revised food packages, and that it should maximize the extent to which the revised food packages motivate the choice to initiate and continue breastfeeding among all racial and ethnic groups by enhancing and stabilizing the funding available for peer counseling and other lactation support staff in the WIC sites. Now, they can do this through the food packages, and that will happen because these are approved through the Farm Bill every 5 years, but this other funding is independent of the food packages and needs to be stabilized. We had a number of recommendations for research, and I'm only going to highlight a couple of them. First, that USDA should fund research to evaluate the effects of the recommended revisions to the food packages on participant satisfaction, participation in the program, redemption of WIC foods, and participants' diets and health. And I'm going to skip one here and move to one the committee also thinks is quite important, and that is fund data collection and analysis of that data toward optimizing support for breastfeeding and increasing the proportion of WIC participants who choose to initiate and continue breastfeeding, and tailoring food package options to best meet the diets and the needs and goals of the breastfeeding diet. Overall, we feel that the revised food packages improve the balance of the packages relative to the dietary guidelines in response to our charge, that they increase flexibility and choice to meet cultural needs and food preferences also in response to our charge, and they provide better support for the mother-infant dyad, particularly for both breastfeeding dyads. However, adequate and consistent support of breastfeeding is critical to achieve WIC's own breastfeeding goals, as well as the vision recommended by the committee, and collection and accessibility of WIC data are critical for future program improvements. WIC collects a lot of data, and this needs to be used much more than it has been. This is a picture of the committee at its last meeting in Woods Hole. We couldn't resist this, and it gives me a chance to thank the lady in the turquoise shirt on the left, Suzanne Murphy, who was an unpaid consultant to the committee. She was the chair of the committee that produced the 2006 revisions, and she was most helpful to us. This is a list of all the committee members. They are Shannon Whaley, Susan Baker, Marion Bittler, who's on the phone today, Patsy Brown, also on the phone today, Alicia Carey, David Davis, who's on the phone today, Mary Kay Fox, Tamara Hatfield, Helen Jensen, Rachel Johnson, Angela Odoms-Young, Rafael Perez Escamilla, who is on the phone today, Catherine Ross, and Charlene Russell-Tucker. And you heard Dr. Zhao acknowledge the efforts of our staff, and I would like to give a special shout out to Marie Latulippe for leading the team here. She did a great job for us, and we really appreciate the effort of all of you. Thank you very much, and that concludes my prepared remarks. We are ready to take questions.
Yes, thank you. And as a reminder, you can type in your questions in the Q&A box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. So we've already received a few questions, so I'm going to open it up. This first question is from Lindsay McNabb. She asks, what is the redemption rate for other forms of fresh fruits and vegetables?
I don't think I know what other forms of fresh fruits and vegetables are, but David, would you like to take a whack at that? You mean like frozen or canned?
I think there's a follow-up. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes.
The question is, what is the redemption rate for other forms of fresh fruits and vegetables?
Yeah, I think there was a follow-up question. I read that during the presentation, and the question basically asks something along the lines of what was the redemption rate for vouchers, and I off the top of my head I can't recall exactly what the number was. Does anyone have that? Does anyone recall the redemption rate for the fruit and vegetable vouchers?
Yes, it was in the slide that I presented earlier, David, but we don't have any separation by the kinds of food or whether it was frozen or canned or fresh. You can use the cash value voucher in a number of different ways, but we can't parse them.
Okay, our next question comes from Andrea Murray. She asks, did cost neutrality take in consideration the cost of making significant changes to a state's MIS?
No, it didn't. The cost neutrality is across the food packages. We actually expect this to be reasonably easy to do because we're not asking the states to do anything they don't already know how to do. But there will be changes to the MIS systems with the change in rotation.
Our next question comes from Emily Lucen, and again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing anyone's names. Are these revisions and implementations 100% going to occur, or are they just being considered?
The reports of the National Academies are recommendations to the groups that have sponsored the report. It is up to those groups to decide how and when to implement them. In general, the committees produce reports that are internally coherent, and it would be desirable to implement them as recommended, but that remains the choice of the sponsor, and we await USDA's decisions about how to take our recommendations.
Our next question comes from, does somebody have a follow-up to that? Okay, our next question comes from Nancy Quinn. She asks, was any consideration given to changing the restrictions on milk fat in light of recent findings?
Yes, we did consider that. However, in the committee's analysis, the data for to support any changes in the milk fat were not yet sufficient. The science behind it was not yet sufficient to cause us to change those recommendations. If anyone else, any of the other committee members would like to add something, please go ahead.
Okay, our next question comes from Connie Gelfer. She asks, I haven't heard anything about allowing CVV for infants 9 months and older because many do not want baby food because their baby is past that stage, or they are making their own baby foods. So this is a major reason why so many do not buy the baby foods.
Just a moment here. We are recommending allowing, and we didn't put it in this slide presentation, that the cash value voucher could be substituted for some of the amount of the infant foods. So yes, that would address the concern that we heard that parents, some parents at least, are really quite interested in preparing their own baby foods.
Our next question comes from Heidi Statz. She asks, since there is no longer a dangling quart, is the option of yogurt removed?
Oh, no. Thank you for that question. It is not removed. There is the substitution for yogurt remains, and we are recommending also that instead of just the 32-ounce plain yogurt, that yogurt be permitted in amounts of 30 to 32 ounces, which would permit individuals to buy the smaller containers of yogurt. This, of course, is at the state's discretion, and states may choose to stay with the 32-ounce amount in the single purchase, or they may permit the other forms, but it is not because they aren't allowed nationally.
We've had several questions from folks asking about when these changes are expected to occur. If you can address that.
Well, if that's not something that the National Academies is in charge of, the USDA was briefed yesterday on the report. They have it in paper copy and electronic copy, just as those of you on the webinar do. It is really up to them what their process would be. We can tell you that because we have done a regulatory impact analysis, that should shorten the time between when USDA receives the report and they implement it. But of course, if they make changes to what we propose, the regulatory impact analysis might have to be redone. But this is all in the hands of USDA. It's not something we can speak to at this juncture.
Our next question comes from Erica Herarte. She asks, is there going to be a substitution for the infant meats?
The answer to that is no. The amounts are reduced. I'm told they can have 10 ounces of meat or 10 ounces of fish. So that's the only substitution, is fish for the meat. But the amount of meat in the package that has meat is reduced in the revised packages. A lot of details in this report. The whole thing with its appendices is 900 pages long, so you'll forgive me if there are a few details that are eluding me in response to these questions.
And that's another reason why it's that URL. There's a lot of materials that support that and kind of break down the report, so there's a lot of good resources on that page as well, in addition to the report. So another question we have is from Kojo Dodo. They ask, why does it take so long to increase CVV amounts?
Okay, that's a question I'd like to pass to our economists. David and Marianne, would either of you like to speak to this?
I guess okay. I can take a stab at it. This is David Davis. The way the legislation is written is that a CVV can only increase in $1 increments. So while fruit and vegetable prices may, for example, increase because of inflation annually, until the inflation increases reach $1, the CVV cannot be increased. Does that make sense?
As good as it gets.
Okay, so basically inflation has to meet that $1 threshold, and then the CVV will be increased by the $1 amount.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Sarah Feller. She asks, can you explain how the fish would be issued to women over the 3-month time period?
So the idea is that they could be issued once every 3rd month, or they could be issued some other way. This is at the discretion of the states and how they choose to implement it based on their own information systems. This is not something the committee specified in detail.
Our next question comes from Kieran Suloja. They ask, you emphasize the supplemental nature of the food packages. Did you consider reducing the formula as a way to release funds?
Yes, we did consider that. We felt that the amount of formula in the packages meets the needs of the formula-fed infants, and that formula was vital to the families for whom formula is the way infants are fed. Is there anyone else from the committee who would like to say more about that?
Okay, this is Rafael Perez Escamilla from the Yale School of Public Health, and I just want to add to your very clear answer, Kathy, that the committee really wanted to make sure that the program supports as much as possible the either breastfeeding or the formula feeding choice that the mothers make.
Thank you.
We're going through everybody's questions. Sorry, trying to get back to some of them. Our next question is, currently clients have a choice between peanut butter or beans rather than having it rotate every other month. Will this continue, or does the recommendation require a rotation among fish, legumes, and peanut butter?
That will not continue. What the committee is proposing is a straight-up rotation among fish, legumes, and peanut butter. The participant can choose not to receive one of these items, but if they don't receive that, they won't receive a substitute, they won't receive a substitute period. This is the committee recommendation. USDA could choose to do something differently, but at the moment it's every 3 months you get the fish, the beans, and the legumes.
Our next question comes from Ora Rosenfeld. Were beans looked at as an option instead of infant meats for vegetarian families?
Yes, they were, and I believe they're allowed. No. I am reminded that the issue here is beans have a fair amount of iron in them, but they're not as bioavailable. But you're talking about for infants. The question is about for infants. Mm-hmm. So yes, we did look at that, but because of the difference in the bioavailability of the iron, we felt that they did not meet the child's iron needs, and thus would not be an adequate substitute for meat. Patsy, did you want to add anything about that?
No, I agree with your summary of the committee's deliberations. We looked at this quite carefully, and we also looked at zinc. And we compared the nutrient content and bioavailability of legumes with infant meats, as Dr. Rasmussen has indicated.
Our next question comes from Amy Resnick. She asked, you mentioned that your recommended changes continue to give a higher value to the exclusively breastfeeding package, yet brings the value closer to the non-exclusive package. What is the reduction of that difference in value with these recommendations?
David, are you able to speak to those numbers?
I'm going to have to hear that question again.
Okay. The question is, I said that the difference in cost among the 3 different dietetic packages is reduced. I don't have the numbers in my head. The numbers are in the report in Chapter 7.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in my head either.
Okay.
There's lots of numbers in this report. Our next question comes from BB Braid. They ask, participants are asking for cottage cheese and substitution for milk. Will you consider that in the future?
We did not choose to offer cottage cheese this time. It's up to USDA how they construct the next committee and whether that next committee will consider this. That's 10 years off, so I think at the moment it's no cottage cheese.
This is Patsy Brown, and may I comment a little bit further, because we did look at cottage cheese and we looked carefully, and we looked at its content of calcium, and concentration-wise, it has less calcium per cup, and therefore the serving size is larger, and that had a cost impact. So we did consider it as we looked at substitutions for dairy.
Thank you, Patsy.
Our next question comes from Jean OLeary. They ask, will Food Package 3 continue to require formula, exempt formula, as well as food? Will the medical provider continue to be required to prescribe formula versus the registered dietitian?
The answer to that, I believe, is no and no.
Okay, our next question is from Ann Hubely. For juice, did you make a specific recommendation of the number of ounces per month for children?
Yes, we did. It isn't just 53%. The 53% is a reflection of the amount relative to the recommendation. I don't remember the specific number.
Our next question comes from Linda Yee. She asks, how about allergy considerations? If they are allergic to peanut butter or fish, are you saying that they can only get 1 month's worth of legumes and none for the rest of the month?
So let me say that we considered allergy and a variety of other medical conditions as we revised the food package. For those individuals allergic to peanuts, it is possible to substitute legumes with our recommendations, but we did not find a suitable substitution for fish, so no substitution for fish is offered in the revised packages.
Our next question comes from, actually I just asked that question. Our next question is, will there be a substitution of egg for peanut or legumes for those with allergies?
You can substitute beans for the eggs in the revised package for those with egg allergies.
Our next question comes from Fran McLaughlin. Are all requirements for a dangling quart removed, specifically when cheese is issued? Cheese is issued at a 3-to-1 ratio. Would 1 quart of milk be needed to be provided when the number one of cheese is provided?
The answer to that is there is no more dangling quart, period. There are some other ways in which the dairy packages have changed that we did not detail on these slides, as they're a general introduction to the program. Again, you can read more about this in the report, but there is no need for a dangling quart.
This is Patsy Brown, and I'd comment a little bit further because I looked at the report. The substitution is 1 pound of cheese and 1 quart of yogurt for 4 quarts of milk, or 2 quarts of yogurt for 2 quarts of milk. So there is an increase in choice for substitutions for dairy now, recommended.
Thank you very much, and that explains how we managed to get to no dangling quart.
Our next question is, was there any consideration of offering non-dairy and non-soy milk substitutes like rice or almond milk?
We did consider those substitutions, and the scientific basis for making our decision was whether or not they delivered the nutrient profile that was required. Neither of those are allowed as a result of looking at the science behind this.
That actually brings us to the top of the hour, so I want to thank everyone again for joining us. Just one more time, I'd like to reiterate, you can download the report as well as the slides used for today's presentation at nationalacademies.org/WIC food packages, and follow the conversation at #WICstudy. Thank you, everyone.